Good day, Mary. I'm Melissa van der Merwe, lecturer and researcher at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and I'm also secretary to the IFAMA Young Board. I'm very honored that I can be joined by you today. So Mary Shelman has over 30 years of experience in business and academia, and she's an internationally recognized thought leader in the global food and agribusiness sector. So Mary, I know that you were the president for IFAMA from 2011 to 2013. What was your day job at the time?
So, hi, Melissa. It's great to be here with you today and to be able to do this interview for an organization that I've been involved with for a very long time, actually back to its very beginnings. So in 2011 to 2013, during the period when I was president, I was director of the Agribusiness program at Harvard Business School. And again, for those that don't know, one of the founders of IFAMA, Ray Goldberg, is a faculty member at Harvard Business School. I had worked with him back many, many years ago, as my son would say, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and even in the early days of IFAMA. So then I was, kind of involved in this program that he had created at Harvard Business School about particularly around training agribusiness leaders that were already in the field. So not MBA students, but executives that come in every year. And I was very grateful to Harvard for giving me the opportunity to also be president and to be able to work a lot with the academic community, industry, and particularly students.
So how did you get involved the first time with IFAMA? When did you learn about it the first time? Because it seemed like you were part of it since the beginning.
I actually spoke at the very first IFAMA conference in Boston that was put on. As Catherine said, I was just a baby then, right? So I was at that stage in a PhD program, which I didn't finish, by the way, but I was working with Ray, and he recruited me to give a talk on the use of case method in the in teaching for agribusiness. And so I still have a copy of that. It's in the very first proceeding. So I can say I was, basically there from the beginning. And then over the years, I was at Harvard for a few years, and then I went into industry. And the period when I was in industry, I actually went to a couple of IFAMA conferences. One in particular that I remember was in Paris, maybe in 1995. And as an industry person at that time, it seemed like it wasn't particularly relevant. Maybe it had moved away from some of its early roots. So when I came back to Harvard in 2005, one of the first things I did was went to the IFAMA meeting in Chicago. And there I re-engaged with some people that I had known over the course of the years. And, they encouraged me to get more involved. And as you can tell, I'm not a shy person. So, I found myself kind of more involved in things on the board and then moving up. And I did a strategic plan before I went and became president. So, so I had kind of a number of roles in that piece.
Great. So it seems like you've been involved quite a bit. I'm actually interested in the conference that was held in Shanghai. What were the highlights of that specific conference? I think you also wrote something on one of the newsletters on that specific conference.
So Shanghai was great because one of the things that was so important to me about IFAMA is that it's a global organization. And I think there's a couple of elements of that. One is that we're global in the sense that, unlike other conferences which stay in one place every year, we've always moved the annual conference around. And that's a great thing because we go to different places in the world. It's actually very difficult as an organization, because it means that you're moving into a place that sometimes you don't have any base at all, and your sponsors who are important, because that's financially makes it very relevant. You have to go recruit those all over again, and getting people there. But I think it's the other part about being a global organization is that we don't have a specific point of view, and this is a tension in the organization sometimes, because we don't want to be European, we don't want to be US centric or Western centric, we don't want to be always about, because then, what about smallholder farmers? What about Southeast Asia? So under my watch, a couple of programs I was most excited about, IFAMA had moved around the world, but it had never been to China. And I knew in my research that China was so important in the global food system, important at the time, and also would be tremendously important in the future, still is important today. So being able to take the conference to Shanghai and have leaders like Pat Yu, who's the head of COFCO, you know, the largest agribusiness enterprise there, come and be our keynote speaker, that was really compelling. But the most important thing that came out of it, I think, is that for so many of the, particularly the academic community that comes to these conferences every year, they had never been to China before. And you know, so they had one vision of China, but yet here, when they were there, it's like, wow, this is nothing like I thought. And there were side trips that were organized, and just being able to influence these individuals that are training our next generation of leaders to say, look, this is really important. You need to be there. I think that was one of the most, you know, probably the most significant thing that came out of that. And in the same respect, I was a huge advocate, probably the one that pushed it to get us to Africa for the first time with the conference in South Africa. So that happened, you know, kind of, you know, 1 year beyond when I was president, but, you know, I was, you know, able to encourage the organization really to go out on a limb there. So those are two things I'm very proud of. And that was in particular a very successful meeting. The Shanghai meeting was a hard meeting to organize, but I think was tremendously important. And being able to leave a legacy like that was, you know, makes me feel proud today looking back, and proud for IFAMA.
So it seems like you contributed quite a lot in getting the conference to some of the more developing countries. What other highlights do you have where you feel like you really, you know, contributed a lot to the organization?
Well, as I mentioned, one of the things that I did was help put together a new strategic plan, which was done before I became president. Maybe, you know, that was on that road, you know, path there. We really were not operating under a strategic plan. And we talked in that strategic plan. It's always with the question about, you know, why IFAMA? Why does this organization exist? And the reason that we were around or what drove the organization in 1990 was different from the needs of the world in 2010. In 1990, nobody was talking about, you know, bringing together industry and talking about these, you know, academic and agribusiness issues around the world. In 2010, suddenly we're having conferences every place. So IFAMA is not unique anymore. So to me, one of the things that we did in that strategic plan is we put in a new pillar for human capital. Because what can IFAMA do? Anybody can organize a conference. You have all these professional organizers today, but what does IFAMA do? We bring together the academic community, we bring together industry, and bring together students. And it's really about developing that next you know, level of human capital all across that, you know, in the students, young academics, you know, students that move on to industry. So to me, as part of that, so we started, we had some career fairs. We had one when we were in the meeting in Cape Town. The student case competition expanded tremendously under that human capital piece. And, you know, we also started then having different relationships with industry. It's like, not that we can bring you in and tell you about what's going on, because I think sometimes academics are always behind on that from where industry is. But look, this is your most important investment, is in talent. Now here we can help you with this. And so that was, again, you know, I think a big piece that I brought in and was there from the beginning, but it just never had been articulated in that way. That was something that really was a focus and a strong asset of the organization.
So that's also something that brought me to IFAMA. So the bringing together of academia and industry and getting people in one room and thought leaders in one room to ask challenging questions and also to try and answer some of these very challenging questions that we sit with. But I'm wondering, you have talked a lot about this, but is this still the way in which we remain relevant? Is this still something that distinguishes us from other organizations in the ag sector?
Well, I think that's a really good, that's a question that the organization's been struggling with for, I know at least the 10 years that I was very actively involved. The last 4 years since I've left Harvard, I haven't been as involved, but I know these conversations still go on. And again, there, are so many conferences today. Back when IFAMA was created, there wasn't, so many places for industry to go, so many places that, raising questions, having great speakers. And to me, it was always a reverse relationship, which is why IFAMA was important. I think in the mind of the academic community, it's like, oh, we're the thought leaders and we should be out answering these questions. And because I've spent time in industry, and in my time in industry, I always found that IFAMA slow and the academic community slow. And even I think Ray Goldberg would say the same thing. One of his motivations that I remember in that first meeting in 1990, it's like, this organization can help make sure that the academic community does relevant research. Because if not, in my experience, academics get hold of something and then they take it into finer and finer and finer and finer details. And it may not at the end have any use at all. Whereas it's like, let's every year bring the academic community in. They're not the ones I'm sharing. It's the industry that's sharing their problems, their challenges. And then the academic community goes off and can work on things that are relevant. So it's a chicken and egg thing. And I think that's so hard to keep that message kind of in front of the organization, that this is really what it's about in particular. So the historic has always been that the presidents come from industry. Sometimes that's easier than others, but when they come from industry, the challenge is they don't understand the academic community. So you really need that bridge there between the two in order for, I think, for the organization to contribute in the way that it is uniquely positioned to contribute.
That makes sense. So talking about research that matters, the title for this year's event is Food for the Future. So I know you've done some research on, the future of food and how millennials think about food and how we would like to see things done differently. But what do you believe needs to change in order for us to really sort of adequately feed people in the future?
Well, I think that's just such a broad question, right? And there's so many different answers to it. I think there's no one right answer. I think alignment and coordination and communication are incredibly important. Places all start from the different places. Another thing that Ray Goldberg always said, he always challenged his classes and the executives in his courses. It's like, there's no global secretary of agriculture. Maybe the FAO could play that role, but they don't play that role. So how do we think about, allocating resources and making the right types of decisions, given that, agriculture and food affects so many things. I mean, it affects economic development. It affects the environment. It affects, human health and well-being. And now, we understand even more about the link between, diet and nutrition and food-related, illnesses, that it's such a complex area. These are truly wicked problems. And we need to keep having this very broad conversation. So I talk about, 4 things in the world today that are going on, 4 big trends. Consumers today have many more questions and, much higher expectations about the food they eat. And that could be all the way, again, this goes from, very smart, Western consumers, that might be a bit of a food snob, to, I think, very important, in developing countries, to where they're making decisions about their family's health every day. And, they need kind of a different package. We have technology, which is transformational, such an amazing time for us. We have sustainability now, which is fundamental. We all understand in a very different way. Agriculture is a big piece of that, but how do we get those right rules out? And then we have, in the world today, these new investors that are coming in a way that they never have before. Impact investors, very wealthy individuals, folks that kind of think the food system's broken and they want to see it change. But the question is, what's in their mind? What's the outcome that they're looking for? So to me, it's about alignment. It's about communication. It's about coordination, and to make sure that again, these wicked problems are, we can't go off and come up with an elegant academic solution. So how do we keep the conversations going across the disciplines? How do we break down silos? How do we get, the best people in the room to work on this? And that's where we get back to human capital again.
Sure, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us for the next few years. So Mary, since you've been part of the association for quite some time, what advice do you have for the future leaders and for youngsters that needs to take all of this forward and sort of carry this legacy on?
So to me, don't forget the human capital part. That's the biggest influence piece, right? That's how you can, the map that, like yourself, I've had a footprint that influences you, you have a footprint that's going to influence beyond. And that's IFAMA's fantastic position. I'd say absolutely keep investing on the student side, keep investing in thinking about, how to support young academics as they, move on in their career, and help them not to think about how to do better academic research, but how to make that research relevant, and how, they should be thinking about, that their contribution is this improved human capital. So I think that's one piece of it. I think the second piece of it is to make sure, it's so hard not to fall into this trap that we always want to get back into. It's like, oh, IFAMA can solve these problems. We can have this point of view because of our members, but our members are all over the world, and we have to really avoid not coming out with like the American view or the Western European view or the less developed country view. We need to keep this as a general organization. I think that's really difficult because as we think, oh, we should be able to help solve some of these problems, then the question is always, what lens are you looking at it with? So I think those are two pieces that I would keep front and center. Keeping the industry engaged, I think that's the biggest challenge, because again, but to me, the value proposition for industry is different than the way it's often presented. And I think, we need to, that's something that can continue to be revisited, in terms of what's relevant to them.
Thank you for your time, Mary. I'm so honored to have spent some time with you. I'm so inspired, and I'm excited to connect with you in future. I'm sure there's a lot that you can teach. To me, this is what IFAMA is about, to connect youngsters with very successful people in industry, that can sort of lead the way for our own futures and our own careers. So it's been truly inspiring. And I think, together we can all change the future of agriculture and food. So thank you so much for your time.
No, well, thank you, Melissa. I'm very excited to have younger people like you in the organization, and be able to, I think having this kind of, archive material is important, because it means that the voices from, the past and that remember the history can still be there when we're, maybe can't be involved in the same way, but also it's just there for you to learn from. And then you have to decide for yourself, right? And organizationally, what's the right path for the future. But I do think it's good to go back and to revisit the past, and but then to have that view about, what's a dynamic organization look like that's going to be, important in the world, impactful in the world, to get to the type of world we want in the future. So thank you so much.